Well, I know last week we looked at Mary and how that played out, and her life was turned upside down, and really everything she thought was going to happen in the future didn't happen that way. But she was okay with that, and it's because she was the Lord's servant. She just said what was true in her heart all along. She said, I'm the Lord's servant, let it be as you have said. And what she really said is, listen, my life belongs to God. He can do whatever he wants in my life. And that's a hard pill to swallow, because that's not something you can say on the spot. That's something that's already got to be there, and it comes out. How many of you know things come out of you when you're under pressure that are there that you may not even know? And sometimes it's good, and you're like, wow. And sometimes you're like, uh-oh, one of those. And it happened that way. So now we get to look at the second individual in the Christmas story, which would be Joseph. We're going to look at her betrothed husband, Jesus' stepfather. And he also had to raise a perfect child as a stepfather. I don't know how many step families we have in here, probably a number of them. But there's always seems this tension when you have these families come together and try to work things out. And you can imagine, after they had other children, and Jesus was born in a household with other children, that they had to still work things out. And as a stepfather, to tell your other children, Jesus is always right. Okay, he's always right. And it just had to be an awkward situation. And it was just difficult. I can imagine the difficulty he experienced as he raised God's son and the pressure that he would be under. So we want to share some backgrounds on things we know. I want to look at Matthew 1:1 as we start out. We're going to look at Matthew 1:1. This is a genealogy, and the genealogy is found in Matthew and in Luke. Joseph's genealogy in Matthew, Luke's genealogy contains Mary. And it's very important that we have those. I'll share a little bit why it's so important, especially of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. It gives us this broad brushstroke, if you will. It lets us know this is of Jesus Christ, who's David's offspring, who came from Abraham. Just gives us all of that, from the father of faith all the way to Jesus Christ. In 3 names, it encapsulates all this that's taken place to fulfill the messianic prophecy given both to Abraham and to David, and how it came to be presented in Jesus Christ. So it's a condensed version of Jesus' direct lineage to fulfill the covenant. What's interesting is there's a very detailed account of the genealogy of Joseph. When you look through and you read the whole thing, the reason for this is it's so important because it was trying to be destroyed. He was preserving the genealogy after the effects of King Herod. You think, what does King Herod have to do with the genealogy? See, Herod was not in a position because of his lineage. He wasn't in a position because he deserved to be in it. What he did, he muscled and connived his way to the throne, is what he did. He wasn't the direct descendant, and he didn't have a right to the throne. There are other people that had a more direct line than Herod did. He had no problem doing whatever it took to keep his position of prominence. He didn't. I'd like to read just a quote from the preacher's commentary on Herod and give you a little bit of background on him. This is in volume 24. It says, in Jewish history, the most natural and essential way to begin the story of a man's life is to give his genealogy. This passage, which might appear uninteresting, is of great importance in Jewish history. Josephus, a great Jewish historian, writing his own autobiography, began with his personal pedigree. King Herod the Great was despised by pure-blooded Jews because he was half Edomite. As a consequence, Herod destroyed the official registers so that others could not prove a more authentic pedigree than his own. As soon as he got in position of power, he started finding genealogies and records and destroying them so no one could find them more doing Luke because they wrote the genealogy. The other ones were being destroyed and they were writing them down and preserving them. We still have them 2,000 years later. We have them. We have them in place, and we can tell the genealogy. But Herod spent much of his time trying to destroy records so that he could keep his position. And we know that he had no problem in killing anyone that got in his way, including a number of children that we'll be looking at in the future here. He just didn't care. He would do anything to keep his position, even if killing hundreds, if not thousands of children, so he could have his position of prominence. Well, let's look at this Joseph story, the condensed genealogy. We've seen that. Now, I could read the whole thing if you want. Okay, we'll just skip to the end. That's what I thought. Every now and then someone will chuckle. a couple times people said, no. Okay, it's okay. I can't pronounce half names anyway, neither can you. And so we wouldn't know if I said them wrong or not, but we'll just go through this. We're going to look at Matthew 1:16. 1:16. And Jacob begot Joseph. I said, wait a minute. Isn't there a Jacob in the Old Testament? Didn't he have a son named Joseph? Yes. So we know Joseph's father was named Jacob. It's a parallel of the Old Testament, same situation. We don't know how many other children Jacob had, but we know that he had one child named Joseph, and we know that they're a direct descendant of David. That whole record, everything in between, just gives credence to Joseph being related to Jacob, and Jacob to David, and David to Abraham, and all the way through. Now, Christ was born here also. So we see in the text that, interesting enough, you have Joseph and Jacob together, and you might one day win a trivia contest with this, and I would like half of it if you learn it from me, that what is Joseph's name in the New Testament, his father's name? What is it? All right, a couple of you would win. All right, Jacob. Jacob had Joseph. If you just Old Testament, New Testament, you win a prize somewhere. And just think of Pastor Joe, he told me that. I'll probably be dead and gone when you win something, but anyway, give it to one of my kids. Now, here we get to Matthew 1:17. All the generations from Abraham to David are 14 generations. From David until the captivity of Babylon are 14 generations. And then from the captivity of Babylon until the Christ, 14 generations. That it just spaced out so perfectly. This is God's divine timetable, keeping track. Just think of a generation as a second. And all these seconds pass, and they're all in sync, just on the face of a clock. Everything's laid out, and God is in complete control of everything, of the timetable, knowing when things are going to happen, knowing when they're going to take place. He knows the beginning from the end. He knows all this. And as it plays out, we see this perfect sequence in there. Every 14 generations, something significant is happening on the timetable. And in between, you have all these wonderful stories of the individuals in between, but these big stories, these 14 generations, significant things happen, and God contains them and points them out in His Word. Now you get to verse 18, it says, now the birth of Jesus Christ was as follows. After his mother Mary was betrothed to Joseph, before they came together, she was found with child of the Holy Spirit. Now this is where it gets interesting. Here's how his birth came to be. See, Mary was betrothed to Joseph. We talked a little bit about that last week, what betrothal means. What would happen if you have an arranged marriage, let's say the mother and the father, Jacob, Joseph's father, and Mary's relatives would get together. They would say, you know what, this looks like a good fit. We'll consummate a marriage. And they would help be involved. And I have to say, I think parents ought to be a little bit more involved in people's lives as they get ready to take this lifelong step and journey. And I don't necessarily believe in arranged marriages, but maybe you. No, I'm just kidding. Just a side note. Caleb went on a cruise. Was it last year or year before last? And I said, son, please don't come home married. just don't do that. Because it could happen. You got a captain on a boat and some, lady's drinking a little too much. Look at him. That's a tall drink of water. You just never know. I'm just saying, I was nervous. He came back single, thank you, and worked out okay. That has nothing to do with the text, I know. But the betrothal period would be this. What would happen is you would have the arranged marriage. And then you'd give a time frame, usually 6 months in between, at least 6 months. Because during that 6 months, it could be that they're arranging a marriage to hide their daughter's shame. If she was violated or if she was with someone else, maybe she was with a married man and now she's pregnant and they don't want anyone else to know. Well, you could find someone else to get married to and arrange a marriage. But with that betrothal period, it's a 6-month period that if there's a child involved in 6 months, listen, if you don't know after 6 months, ain't nothing there. I mean, it's okay. But if she becomes pregnant during that period, guess what? You knew something prior and you're hiding it. But you can't hide it except for a period of time. So this is very interesting because it says here, the mother Mary was betrothed to Joseph, but before they came together, it means before they consummated a marriage, before they were intimate, she was found to be with child of the Holy Spirit. Now that put Joseph in a very awkward position because you know how the story is. Gabriel comes to Mary, shares a story of what's going to happen in her life, but he gives her this sign. Your cousin Elizabeth is going to have a baby. The one who is said to be barren is 6 months pregnant. So Mary goes to be with Elizabeth, and 6 and 3 is 9, so 3 months she's gone living with it. She's got to see the sign because the angel gave a very specific sign. She's going to have a baby, a male child. So she waits for 3 months. It wasn't good enough just she went there. Yep, she's pregnant. It wasn't that. It's like it had to be all of it. She had to be pregnant, but she had to bring forth a male child. And when Elizabeth had the male child and John could finally talk again, or Zacharias could finally talk again and name him John, then she comes back home. I don't know about you, but if you were engaged to someone and they came back from a 3 month trip and all of a sudden found out to be pregnant, you'd pretty quick figure out it's not yours. Right? Especially if you know you weren't with him. So what is Joseph supposed to think? You go off to your cousins for 3 months, you come back, and you're pregnant. But Mary said, no, Joseph, listen, you don't understand. It's God's son. See, the angel came to me and said I was going to have this baby. What's the chances of that happening? There'd only be one person ever to have a virgin birth. One person ever. It would never ever happen except one time in history. That means it's 1 in a billion shot that it's her. 1 in a billion shot that Mary would be the one that God would choose. Well, he won the lottery because it is her. But can you imagine trying to believe that in your mind? That Mary is the one that God chose to bring the Messiah into the world? That'd be hard. You know what makes it harder? Outside influences. Trust and love come around you trying to tell you what you should do. So, okay. And that happens. Whenever there's a decision to be made, it seems like people come out of the woodwork to give you advice. You know what is crazy? Most of the advice doesn't line up with each other. So you got popcorn ideas everywhere, and you're supposed to make, now you got more information than you need to try to make a decision that you have to live with. You know what the people who give you advice have to do afterwards? Nothing. They get to leave and walk away and leave you hold the bag, and they're not involved. So it puts him in a real difficult decision. Now he has a decision to make. What do I do now? Mary leaves. She's gone for 3 months. She comes back. Now she has a child. What is she supposed to do? What is he supposed to do? Well, he didn't check her social media account because she didn't have one. He couldn't see Mary showing her little baby. What do they do on that now? Then all these celebrities are showing their baby bump. I don't even know what that's about. We know. Okay, you have a baby. So what? Show us a picture after you're born. You know. Now that didn't happen. She's gone 3 months. She comes back. But here's what you're going to love about Joseph. Verse 19, and we're going to look at this for a little bit. Spend some time here. Then Joseph, her husband, being a just man, not wanting to make her a public example, was minded to put her away secretly. Now he's a just man, but there's something else he has here. He's just, but he has mercy. Just with mercy mixed in. Now people like to be just right away, unless it's at them, then they want the mercy part. But for people to extend mercy and justice at the same time is a rare combination. We don't mind justice because we want ours, right? If something's against us, we will plead our case, and we want justice all the time. But here's what happens. He's a just man. And being just, he still wanted to show mercy because he didn't want to put her in a public example. He knows what happened. If you go to John chapter 8, you start reading through, you remember what happens? Jesus is there, and the Sadducees, the Pharisees, they bring a woman who's been caught in the act of adultery, and they lay her down in front of Jesus, and the law says we should stone her. What do you say? Because the penalty for being unfaithful is execution. That's what the penalty is. And so when they bring that woman and lay in front of Jesus, and he bends down, starts writing in the sand, and all these things happen, one by one they drop their stones and walk away. He's probably writing everything they did, or maybe the times they were with her themselves. I don't know, but they're writing something. He's writing something, and they drop their stones and walk away. But we understand the penalty for being unfaithful in those days was public execution. And Joseph knows that if he does this publicly, if he takes her to the gate and says she is with child during the betrothal period, they would pick up stones right there. He'd be the first one, have to throw first stone, the rest of them would come in, and he would be dead before it's over. He said, I don't want that to happen. Although